The morning my name was called at the Austin Convention Center, I was shaking. Not from nerves. I had practiced walking in heels for 2 weeks, balancing a fake folder across our apartment hallway while my husband laughed from the couch. No, I was shaking because I had just checked my phone backstage, and my mother had sent me a text that read, "We're so sorry, baby. Your brother needs us right now. You understand." I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone face down in my jacket pocket and walked out onto that stage anyway. My name is Audrey. I'm 31 years old, and I spent the better part of my adult life convincing myself that my family loved me the same way they loved my brother Kyle, just differently. Quietly. In the background. I told myself that's just how some families work. Not everyone is loud about it. It took my nursing pinning ceremony for me to finally stop lying to myself. I should give you some context because none of this happened in a vacuum. Things like this never do. I grew up in a mid-sized house in Round Rock, Texas. The kind of neighborhood where everyone has a truck in the driveway and a dog that barks at the mailman. My parents, my brother Kyle, and me. Kyle is 4 years older than I am. From the time I could form memories, he was the son that everything in our household orbited around. Kyle made varsity baseball at 16. My parents drove 4 hours to Lubbock for an away game when I was 12. I stayed with our neighbor because they didn't want to leave me alone overnight, but they didn't ask if I wanted to come. I found out about the trip the morning they left. Kyle dropped out of UT Austin his sophomore year because, as my mother explained it, college wasn't for everyone. My parents paid off the $3,000 he owed in unpaid housing fees without a single argument. When I asked if they could help cover my nursing school textbooks, a few $100s that semester, my father said I should look into the library's rental program. I'm not saying any of this to paint my parents as monsters. They weren't cruel people. They were just people who had decided, somewhere along the way, that Kyle needed more, and that I was the one who could handle things on my own. I handled things on my own for a long time. I put myself through Concordia University, Texas on a combination of Pell Grants, a part-time job at a medical supply company, and the nursing scholarship I applied for 3 years running before I finally got it. I graduated with my bachelor's in nursing, passed my NCLEX on the first try, and landed a position at St. David's Medical Center in Austin, all without a single dime from my parents beyond the roof they'd given me growing up. My husband Owen was with me for all of it. We met in our mid-20s, dated for 2 years, and got married in a small ceremony at Barton Creek with 20 people and wildflowers I arranged myself. My parents came to the wedding. My mother cried. My father shook Owen's hand and said he seemed like a good man. Kyle showed up an hour late because of traffic and spent most of the reception outside on a phone call. I told myself, that's just how he is. That's just how it's always been. It's fine. I'm fine. The pinning ceremony mattered to me more than I had told anyone, even Owen. In nursing, the pinning ceremony is something separate from graduation. It's specific to the profession, a tradition going back over a century. You receive a small pin from someone who means something to you. Colleagues, mentors, family. It's intimate in a way that a regular graduation isn't. I had spent 2 years in an RN to BSN completion program while working full-time on the cardiac unit, and earning my Bachelor of Science in Nursing was the hardest thing I had ever done. I asked my mother 6 weeks in advance to save the date. May 14th. Austin Convention Center. Doors open at 6:30. I texted her the details, emailed a formal reminder, and called her the week before just to confirm. "We'll be there," she said. "Wouldn't miss it." My father-in-law, Gerald, Owen's dad, who lives out in Bastrop and drives a pickup older than I am, had already RSVP'd yes and pressed his good shirt. The morning of May 14th, I was at the venue by 4:30 to help with setup. Owen was coming straight from work and meeting me there. Gerald was driving in from Bastrop. My parents were supposed to drive 45 minutes from Round Rock. At 5:47, my mother's text came through. "We're so sorry, baby. Your brother needs us right now. You understand." I stood in a hallway that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and convention center coffee, and I stared at those words until they blurred. I typed back, "What happened? Is he okay?" She replied within 30 seconds, "He and Amanda had a big fight. He's really struggling. You know how he gets. We just couldn't leave him alone tonight. We know you'll do great. Send pictures." Kyle and Amanda had been on and off for 2 years. Their fights were not new. Their fights were not emergencies. Kyle had never, to my knowledge, been in any physical danger during their arguments. He got loud. He got dramatic. He called my mother, and my mother dropped everything. She had dropped everything for him since 1987. I put my phone back in my pocket. I found the bathroom at the end of the hall. I stood in front of the mirror for a little while and breathed. Then I fixed my lipstick, walked back out, and finished helping set up the chairs. Owen found me before the ceremony started. He took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" Not a question. He knows me. I showed him the texts. He read them, and something moved across his expression. Something controlled and quiet that I recognized as the version of anger he keeps very still. He put his arm around me and said, "Gerald's parking." He texted me. Gerald walked in 7 minutes later in his pressed shirt with a corsage and a plastic box, a small pink one, because he had asked me 3 weeks earlier what my favorite flowers were, and I'd said peonies, and he'd found the closest thing at the HEB floral department. He handed it to me and said, "You look like a doctor." Is that offensive to say to a nurse? I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in an hour. I won't pretend the ceremony wasn't hard. I sat in that room and watched the nurses around me get penned by their mothers and their fathers and their grandparents and their best friends, and I kept my face very composed. When it was my turn, Owen pinned me. Gerald stood up and clapped loud enough that the woman in front of him turned around, and he didn't apologize. In the photos from that night, I am smiling, a real smile. It just took me a while to understand why. I didn't say anything to my parents that night. I sent my mother a photo because she'd asked for one. She replied with 3 heart emojis and said I looked beautiful. My father sent a thumbs up. I drove home with Owen, and we sat in the parking garage of our apartment building for 20 minutes not talking. Finally, he said, "What do you need?" I said, "I don't know yet." The next morning, I woke up and something had shifted. I can't explain it exactly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like a room in my chest that had been slowly filling with water for 30 years, finally reached the ceiling, and there was nowhere left for it to go. I called in a personal day. I sat at our kitchen table with my coffee and I started writing things down, not to send to anyone, just to see them in front of me. Kyle's graduation from high school, my parents threw a party for 40 people. My high school graduation, dinner at Chili's, just the 4 of us, and my mother spent 20 minutes on her phone because Kyle had called upset about something. Kyle's 25th birthday, my parents flew to Vegas with him because he'd always wanted to go. My 25th birthday, my mother forgot until the evening and called to apologize. My father sent a card 2 days late. Kyle's DUI at 28. My parents hired him a lawyer. The bill was $6,000. They never mentioned it until I overheard them talking about it at Thanksgiving. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I sat back and looked at what I'd written and understood, with a clarity I hadn't had before, that this wasn't a series of oversights. This was a pattern, and I had been accommodating it my entire life because accommodation had always felt safer than acknowledging what it meant. I didn't move out. Owen and I had our own apartment, but I did something that felt just as significant. I went quiet. I stopped initiating. I stopped calling on Sunday afternoons. I stopped sending the articles my mother liked, the funny dog videos, the updates about work. I stopped texting my father about the Longhorns. I didn't announce it. I didn't write a letter. I just stopped filling the silence. It took my mother 11 days to notice. She called on a Tuesday evening. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying she hadn't heard from me in a while and hoped everything was okay. I texted back, "All good, just busy at work." She called again 3 days later. I answered this time. "You seem distant," she said. "I'm okay," I said. "Is something wrong?" I thought about it. I thought about that hallway with the industrial carpet smell and the text that said, "You understand," and Gerald's HEB corsage and the way Owen had clapped alone in a row of strangers. "I've just been thinking a lot," I said. "About what?" "About the pinning ceremony." There was a pause. "Honey, we explained that. Kyle was really—" "I know," I said. "You explained it. I didn't say anything else about it. But I think she heard something in my voice because she didn't push." We talked for 10 more minutes about nothing. The weather, her garden, a show she was watching, and when we hung up, I felt hollowed out, and also, strangely, lighter. The real rupture happened 5 weeks later, and it wasn't my doing. Kyle called me on a Saturday morning. This was unusual. Kyle and I had never been close. Not really. And our calls were typically limited to family logistics. He said he and Amanda had broken up for good, and he was going to need to borrow some money to cover his rent while he got back on his feet. I asked how much. He said $3,000. I told him I didn't have $3,000 to lend. This was not entirely true. We had it in savings, but it was earmarked for the house down payment Owen and I had been working toward for 3 years. I was not going to touch it. What I said was technically a simplification, but it was not a lie that I felt bad about. Kyle got quiet in the way that meant he was irritated. Then he said, "You and Owen make good money." "We're saving for a house," I said. "I just need a few months. I'll pay you back." "I can't do it, Kyle." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat with my phone in my hand and waited. I didn't have to wait long. My mother called 40 minutes later. Her voice had that particular tone, measured, careful, the one she uses when she thinks she's being reasonable. She said Kyle had told her about our conversation and she just wanted to talk through it because family helps family, and she knew Owen and I had been doing well financially, and surely Mom, I said. I'm not lending him $3,000. It would mean so much to him. He can apply for a personal loan. He can pick up extra shifts. He has options. You sound very cold right now. I breathed through that. I'm not cold. I'm just not going to do this. This isn't like you, Audrey. And I thought, isn't it? Or is this exactly like me, the version of me that everyone forgot existed because she was always so quiet about it? I've been thinking a lot about the pinning ceremony, I said, and about other things. I don't want to get into it right now, but I need some space. Space, my mother repeated, like the word was foreign. Yes, I need a little space right now. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. I ended the call. My hands were not shaking. I was surprised by that. What followed was not a dramatic storm. No screaming phone calls, no confrontational visit where everyone said the things they'd held back for years. My family is not that kind of family. What happened instead was more like a cold front. A silence that moved in and settled. My mother texted twice. Cordial, careful texts. "Hope you're doing okay. Thinking of you." I replied briefly both times. My father didn't text at all, which was not unusual. My father has always let my mother handle what he considers personal matters. Kyle texted once. "Real nice, Audrey." I didn't respond to that one. Owen and I talked about it every night for 2 weeks. He was careful to let me lead. He'd had his own complicated family dynamics growing up, and he understood that this was mine to navigate. But one evening he said quietly, "You don't have to manage everyone else's reaction to you setting a boundary. That's their work, not yours." I had known that intellectually for years. I had told patients' families similar things in clinical contexts. Hearing it said plainly about my own situation cracked something open. I cried that night for a long time. Not sad crying exactly. More like the release that comes when you've been holding your breath without realizing it. The person I hadn't expected to hear from was my Aunt Sylvia, my mother's older sister. She lives in San Antonio, and we've been close when I was younger. She was the one who took me to get my first library card, who sent me book packages in college, who called on my birthday without fail every single year. As I got older and life got busier, we drifted to holiday calls and occasional texts. I hadn't thought to tell her what was happening. She called me on a Thursday in July. I almost didn't pick up. "I heard some things from your mother," she said after we'd gotten through the hellos. "And I want to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." "Okay," I said. "I watched your mother do this with you your entire childhood." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. I said something to her about it twice. Once when you were maybe 9 or 10, once when you were in high school. She told me I didn't understand the situation. That Kyle needed more support and you were stronger. She paused. I should have said more. I've thought about it for a long time. I didn't know what to say for a moment. "I went to nursing school," she said. "Did you know that?" "I dropped out after a year. It wasn't for me. But I remember what it cost. Not just money. What it cost." Another pause. "I'm proud of you, Audrey. I've always been proud of you. I should have said that louder." I was crying before she finished, not the graceful kind. She stayed on the phone with me for almost 2 hours. We talked about things I hadn't talked about with anyone. The specific weight of being the child in a family who is always assumed to be fine. The strange exhaustion of being reliable. The way you can love people and still need to step back from what they've built around you. Before we hung up, she said, "You are not tearing anything apart. You're just done pretending the cracks aren't there." I wrote that down afterward. I still have it in my notes app. In September, Owen and I put an offer on a house. A 3-bedroom craftsman in Pflugerville, good school district for someday, a backyard big enough for the dog we'd been talking about for 2 years, a kitchen with an island that I'd wanted since I was 24 years old, and living in a studio with a hot plate. The offer was accepted on a Wednesday afternoon. I was on break at the hospital when my realtor called, and I went outside to the little courtyard we have near the cardiac wing and cried into my phone while a sparrow watched me from a planter. I called Owen, I called Aunt Sylvia. I texted Gerald, who replied with 7 exclamation points and offered to help us move. I did not call my mother. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because it would be easy to frame it as triumphant or clean. It wasn't. It felt like loss and relief at the exact same time. 2 things occupying the same space, which is a sensation I don't think English has the right word for. I missed the mother I had wanted her to be. I was letting go of the one she actually was, or at least of my responsibility to keep pretending the difference didn't matter. My mother found out about the house through Facebook. I hadn't posted anything, but Owen's cousin had commented on a photo I'd shared in a private family group. His family, not mine, and somehow through a chain of social media mechanics I still don't fully understand, my mother saw it. She called me that evening, I answered. "You bought a house," she said. "We did. You didn't tell us." "No," I said, "I didn't." The silence on her end was long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then she said, quietly, "I don't understand what's happening." And I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the pinning ceremony and the text that said, "You understand?" I thought about the corsage from H-E-B and Gerald in his pressed shirt. I thought about 9-year-old me finding out my parents had left for a baseball game while I slept. "Mom," I said, "I think you do understand. I think if you sit with it, you know exactly what's happening." She was quiet again. "Then, I'm your mother." "I know," I said. "I know you are." "Doesn't that mean something?" "It means a lot," I said. "But it doesn't mean I have to keep being invisible so Kyle can keep taking up all the space." I had never said anything like that out loud to her, not once in 31 years. She started crying. I listened. I didn't take it back. I didn't apologize or soften it or walk it backward into something more comfortable. I just let it be true, out in the open, for the first time. "I didn't know you felt invisible," she finally said. And what was heartbreaking about it, what I'm still sitting with, is that I believed her. I think she genuinely didn't know, which is its own kind of answer to a question I never knew how to ask. We moved into the house on a Saturday in October. Gerald showed up at 7 in the morning with his truck and 2 of his friends from his bowling league, and they moved our furniture like a pit crew. Aunt Sylvia drove up from San Antonio with a lasagna and a set of dish towels that are the nicest thing I own. Owen's sister brought wine. Our neighbor from the apartment complex, a retired woman named Frances who had watched our cat twice, handed us a card with a $20 bill inside and said, "For something small but just yours." I put the card on our kitchen island. Every time I walked past it that day, I thought, just yours. My parents did not come. I had not invited them. My father sent a text that said congratulations on the house. Hope it goes well. My mother sent a longer one that I read once and didn't reply to right away. Not because I was being cruel. I wasn't. I just needed to read it in the right headspace, when I wasn't carrying boxes and laughing with Gerald and feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the protagonist of my own life. I read her text that night, after everyone had gone and Owen was asleep, and I was sitting on our back porch in the dark, listening to whatever it is that makes noise in Texas suburbs in October. She wrote that she had been doing a lot of thinking, that she had talked to my father, that she knew she had handled a lot of things wrong, and she didn't expect me to forgive her immediately. But she wanted me to know she understood more than she had before, that she was proud of me, and she was sorry it had taken her this long to say it plainly, that she wanted, if I was willing to try. I sat with it for a long time. I'm still sitting with it, honestly. We've talked twice since then. Careful conversations, both of us feeling out where the edges are now. It's not repaired. I don't know if it will be fully. Some things that have had years to calcify don't just soften in a few months, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. What I do know is this: I am sitting on the back porch of a house I bought. In a few weeks, we're going to pick up the dog, a beagle mix from the rescue in Cedar Park that Owen has already named Watson, even though we agreed we'd name him together. Aunt Sylvia is coming for Thanksgiving. Gerald is bringing his famous sweet potato casserole, which he says is a secret recipe, but which I'm fairly certain came off the back of a can. And I, for the first time in my adult life, am not spending my energy making myself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. The morning I walked across that stage at the Austin Convention Center, I had 3 cold, empty seats where my family should have been, and I walked across anyway. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal, not the anger, just the fact that I walked across anyway, and I received what I had earned, and no one's absence could make the 4 years of night shifts and care plans in clinical hours unhappen. I am a nurse. I bought a house. I have a husband who drives in the middle of the night if I text him that I'm scared, and a father-in-law who finds peonies at the H-E-B floral department and doesn't think it's silly. I have an aunt who should have spoken up sooner and knows it and said so. That's my family. The one that shows up. The rest of it, I'm still figuring out what to do with. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't always have to have it figured out. Maybe sometimes you're allowed to just sit on your porch in the dark and listen to the October sounds and let the questions stay open a little longer. I'm in no hurry anymore. I have somewhere to be. I used to think that being easy to overlook was a personality trait, something built into me, like my eye color or the way I can't sleep past 6 in the morning no matter how tired I am. I thought some people were just born to be noticed. And some people were born to manage things quietly in the background, and I had drawn the second card, and that was that. It took standing alone backstage at the Austin Convention Center, reading a text that said "you understand," to realize that I had never drawn that card. Someone had just kept handing it to me over and over, and I had kept accepting it because I didn't know I was allowed to put it down. That's the thing about how we treat people over a long enough time. It compounds. Every small decision, who gets the party, who gets the lawyer, who gets the phone call in the middle of the night, accumulates into something the other person eventually has to reckon with. My parents didn't intend to make me feel invisible. I believe that. But intention doesn't cancel out effect, and the effect, over 31 years, was a daughter who had learned to shrink herself into whatever space was left over after her brother was done. What changed wasn't one conversation or one dramatic confrontation. It was a series of small, honest choices. I stopped filling the silence. I held a boundary about the money. I said the word invisible out loud to my mother for the first time in my life. None of those things felt powerful in the moment. They felt terrifying. But each one was an act of self-respect. And self-respect, I've learned, is not something you feel first and then act on. It's something you act on first. And the feeling follows, slowly, imperfectly, in ways you don't always recognize until later. Gerald showing up with a corsage from the H-E-B floral department taught me something I hadn't known I needed to learn, that being seen clearly by one person is worth more than being half seen by many. He didn't owe me anything. He drove from Bastrop because Owen is his son and I am Owen's wife, and that to him was enough of a reason. It was so simple. I had just never been on the receiving end of it before. Aunt Sylvia said she should have spoken up sooner. She's right, and the fact that she said so, plainly, without excuses, was its own kind of gift. There are people in our lives who watch what's happening and say nothing because it isn't their fight, or because they don't want the disruption. I understand that, but there is a cost to that silence, and it is paid by the person being overlooked. If you see it happening to someone you love, say something. Say it louder than you think you need to. The person on the receiving end is probably working very hard to convince themselves everything is fine. I don't know exactly what my relationship with my parents looks like from here. We're in it, somewhere in the middle of something that doesn't have a clean shape yet. What I know is that I am no longer managing their comfort at the expense of my own. I bought a house. I have a backyard. I have a beagle named Watson, who Owen technically named first, but I don't mind. The pinning ceremony happened with or without them. I walked across that stage. I received what I had earned. And no one's absence, not then, not ever, can reach back in time and unmake that.